How did the Roman Ratnapati? Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Hello, Jay. How did Roman Cataphracts go to war? I don't know what a Cataphract is. I guess some horse warrior then. But the channel Invicta 2 years ago. Sounds interesting.
Rome's heavy cavalry were among its most elite units, but sadly remain largely overlooked by modern media. For instance, by the empire of the 4th century
I definitely don't think of cavalry when I think of Roman war tactic.
AD, the Notitia Dignitatum calls out the presence of 19 distinct units spread across the east and west.
That is in the Byzantine Empire.
These cataphracts would prove key to the defense of the realm. But fielding heavy cavalry was much more involved than fielding standard infantry forces. In this video, we will see what it was like to prepare a Roman cataphract for battle.
The ice thing made the horse looks like it has like what's the name, like bug eyes, I guess, you know, like a fly.
At Imperium Romanum. They are a fantastic reenactment group based out of the actual Rhine frontier, who produce in-depth documentaries on both military and civilian life.
Cool.
Their content is highly educational and extremely well produced, with videos that put Hollywood to shame and are the best we've ever seen of this kind. Be sure to check out their YouTube channel linked in the description below and give them some support. Meanwhile, the aerial footage and large-scale scenes for this episode were provided by our sponsor, Magellan TV, and is a part of their incredible series, Knights.
Knights.
The series traces the rise and fall of Europe's heavy cavalry across the centuries. Each episode focuses on a chapter of this story, with well-produced scenes of life in the past and stunning visual effects which bring to life castles, battles, and sieges of the era.
Okay.
History videos like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch Knights or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/Invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy.
Surviving sources mention the Roman Empire deploying cataphracts across its vast territories, from Britain to Palmyra. However, they could not be everywhere at once, as such units were expensive, and there were only ever a few thousand of them at a time.
Okay.
Cataphracts were therefore only deployed in strategic theatres of war and when a decisive battle was imminent.
Fair enough, I mean,
it will now be worth discussing why they were so rare. The first major expense would have been procuring the steeds for these mounted units. Horses had to be of sufficient size, disposition, and had to be trained specifically for the role. While Italy, contrary to popular belief, actually did provide some good stock, these mounts came from further afield. Most of them were sourced from the eastern provinces, with modern gravesite findings confirming that the Roman army bred horses that were especially large for the ranks of the cataphracts. Each man would have had several.
I mean, the horse needs to be massive. It needs like to carry its own armor plus a guy that's already pretty big, and the guy has like his own armor and gear, so you need a very strong horse, yeah.
Especially to allow the horses to rest. After all, their armor was hot and heavy, and larger horses tend to have lower stamina, especially in hot conditions. Once the horses had been procured, however, they would then need to be maintained. This involved an extensive support network to provide water, fodder, stablemen, farriers, smiths, trainers, and handlers. In addition, they needed enough space to be fed and regularly exercised. Pound for pound, a cataphract unit therefore required a greater proportion of logistics than your average legionary.
Yeah.
Next came the rider. Data suggests that there was no standardized gear as with the legions, but that instead each man would outfit himself and his horse according to personal preference. Such custom gear was hard to come by, Our records point to the existence of only 4 dedicated armory workshops for Cataphracts in the late Empire. This made the Cataphracts even more expensive to furnish. Therefore, only the most elite troops were worth the investment. Each recruit served over a decade in the regular cavalry before he was even recommended to serve with the Cataphracts. Thus, such veteran units not only represented a huge concentration of wealth, but also experience.
So the best of the best.
With this understanding in mind, let's see how it all comes together when a Cataphract prepared for battle.
All right.
Doing so was no easy matter and would have required support staff. The expensive military saddle was the first piece of the kit to be mounted. High-backed saddles and stirrups were still unknown, and instead the Romans relied on the 4-horn saddle. It provided a padded seat and braced the rider during maneuvers such as charging, firing arrows, or skirmishing.
It looks more advanced as a saddle than I expect for the time.
Horse's armor, or barding, which varied in its coverage. Heavier sets offered better protection, but were more costly and impeded mobility. This one is a relatively standard kit based on archaeological findings
and the horse doesn't want it.
Europos. It's a covering of bronze scale, with each scale sewn onto a leather or cloth backing. It provided armor for the sides of the horses, which would have been by far the most vulnerable. While the armor would not have protected against a strong braced attack, it would deflect glancing blows, help to keep the mount calm, and serve to reinforce the image of an unstoppable man of metal. Here,
it looks cool.
We'll take a moment to discuss armor. Often, especially in video games, gear gets presented in a hierarchy. Bronze gets upgraded to iron, and scale gets upgraded to mail. However, reality is not so clear-cut.
I've ridden an horse once when I was younger. Like in a big mountain, there was like some place where they, let you ride a horse. Like you pay and you kind of like go around seeing the views and all that. I think it was like a 1 or 2 hour ride. Biggest thing I remember was, like I was a kid. I was like 12 or something, so I was obviously way smaller. But even then, you felt like so high up on the horse. It was kind of scary. And yeah, like I kept being afraid the horse would like make me fall because we're walking like in mountain terrain with a lot of rocks and stuff like that. And so we would often like slip a little bit on a rock, and there would be like a bit of a tussle. And the other thing I remember a lot is like once I had to get off the horse, I could barely like move my leg to get over the side of the horse because after like 2 hours or something of being on it, my ass and my legs were like numb to the max. Yeah, it's definitely like it was cool to ride an horse, but it definitely was kind of like you probably need to get used to it for a very long time to like not feel numb after it. Yeah.
For instance, in antiquity, bronze and iron appear to have performed similarly and were often used interchangeably, depending on a variety of factors ranging from ease of manufacture and maintenance to personal preference.
So I think another one of your messages didn't show up.
That auxiliaries and Cataphracts preferred bronze scale as a general form of defense. This worked well for larger, more rigid portions of the body, while mail was used in areas requiring more flexibility, such as the thighs and face. One special piece of Cataphract armor worth mentioning is the horse's headgear, known as the chanfron. Made from a combination of leather and metal,
it looks like fly eyes.
Its role was to protect a horse's head and eyes. However, a secondary benefit discovered repeatedly in modern reenactment is that it terrified other horses who weren't used to seeing them. Such psychological effects prove advantageous in cavalry-on-cavalry engagements.
I see. Scare the other horse. Alright.
Another unique piece of gear used by some Cataphracts was special armor-plated horseshoes meant to protect the hooves. This helped combat the use of caltrops, which were otherwise an incredibly cheap and common way to cripple mounted units. After all,
I never thought that would be a thing. Yeah, just to deal with horse, just a bunch of that. They walk on it, and yeah,
The horse meant
I didn't think
a
of that.
downed rider.
That's messed up.
Once a horse had been sufficiently outfitted, it would now be the turn of his rider. This would have begun from the bottom up. In this case, our soldier has donned a pair of bronze greaves, commonly used by wealthy troops throughout the
20th century,
Greco-Roman period. These proved especially useful for mounted forces whose dangling legs would otherwise be dangerously exposed to foes on the ground.
Yeah.
Next came some form of thigh protection.
It already looks
As
so heavy.
mentioned, this would have varied by rider. In our example, a light mobile kit of hardened leather is being employed. Others may have chosen
How'd you go to
mail
the bathroom with
or
all that?
foregone any armor at all. The upper body, meanwhile, was typically covered by a tunic, over which would be strapped a piece of padded cloth armor. While the name might make it appear flimsy, padded cloth was actually quite effective at absorbing impact damage whilst remaining quite light and resistant to chafing.
Okay.
In fact, it is one of the most common forms of armor in history.
Makes sense, yeah.
But for the Cataphracts, this was not enough.
Yeah.
Riders would don additional layers of protection, but again, its incarnation would have varied. Our set today is based on another find from Dura Europos. The design was quite common across the East, but bears some traces of decidedly Roman influence in the form of its reinforced collar.
I see.
Here, each scale would be individually sewn onto a cloth or leather backing,
Individually.
with adjacent scales slightly overlapping, in a similar concept to modern dragon skin ballistic armor. Altogether,
Looks pretty
such
good.
armor provided the wearer protection that was both flexible and incredibly tough. In addition, maintenance was also relatively easy, since individual scales could be quickly produced and replaced. Next, a heavy leather belt would be strapped around
You are
his
never
waist.
going to the bathroom with all
This would
this.
help secure and balance the weight of his armor,
I'm just saying.
improving the overall comfort of the rider. Another strap was then added over his shoulder to hold a scabbard which hung over a rider's right leg. Generally, it carried the standard Roman cavalry sword, or spatha, which was longer than the gladius and had a rounded tip. The sword would see widespread use for centuries, eventually developing into a standard infantry weapon. The final piece of armor, of course, was the helmet. These
This
were
helmet
perhaps
looks
the most
crazy.
varied pieces of equipment, and archaeological finds vary drastically between grave sites. Some were more conical, some had a chain aventail, some had masks, some had horns, and some had plumes. This particular piece is
looks
a
almost
copy
steampunk,
of
this
a
one.
late Roman ridge helmet. Like most Cataphract helmets, it was made of iron sheathed in precious metal. But what makes it stand out are the intricate colored gems
Right.
worked into the surface. One can only imagine
That's
its
insane.
brilliance under the full sun of a pitched battle. The purpose here is clear: to serve as a distinct mark of a Cataphract's great and fierce reputation.
Yeah.
Understandably, the weight of all this gear made mounting a more difficult process.
Yeah.
Early records from the Roman period scorned those who used a saddle, let alone those who required assistance in mounting a horse. But for the super heavy forces of the Cataphracts, whose kit could weigh over 60 pounds, they would gladly take the help. Once rider and horse were both settled, a groom would
Okay, you
then
might already be tired just getting on the horse, you know? How'd you go into battle when you're already tired getting, like, you have to stand there getting all the equipment put on, so, like, you know, adding on weight, and then you get on the horse. Yeah.
the final pieces of equipment. First came auxiliary weapons such as bows or quivers of javelins. These gave Cataphracts tactical flexibility on the battlefield, allowing them to skirmish and engage at range until they were ready to charge. Next came the shield. For Cataphracts, these were often relatively small pieces used to deflect targeted blows, while their armor would take care of the rest. Finally, a rider would receive his lance. This kontos often measured up to 12 feet and was so heavy that it had to be braced with both hands. The lance was able to pierce up to 2 layers of armor easily when properly leveled at a target, and was even successfully used in combat against war elephants.
War elephants.
Once
Crazy.
ready to ride, it's hard to ignore the sheer psychological impact of seeing one of these elite forces in the flesh. Their gear exudes a sense of wealth and power unmatched by almost any other force on the
I
battle.
mean, on one hand, I would say, like, you know, I don't know, like, it's a lot of gear, it's a lot of like protection, but it doesn't seem that hard to deal with. Like, you know, if you're like a foot soldier, in a battle, you just, you know, you go for the horse, which has a lot of the neck exposed, and then once the rider falls down, I mean, like, the guy has so much stuff on him, it's gonna take him like 2 minutes to get back up on his feet, and, you know, you can just club him while he's down. So, I don't know, like, I feel like I guess it probably works, obviously, since it's a big thing in history, but it feels like it's too much. Like, if that was me, I would be like, you know, this is too heavy, I would never be able to like move freely once I'm off the horse or something. I don't know.
Battlefield. It's easy to understand.
You can't dodge, you
why
just have to
Cataphracts
hope that they are
enjoyed
more
a
resistant.
legendary reputation among the average infantryman, many of whom had only ever heard whispers of these men of metal. To see their shining ranks on your side of battle would provide a huge morale boost to Allied forces whilst instilling fear in their enemies.
Yeah.
But we must remember that the deployment of Cataphracts in their full splendor was a rather rare affair. Their primary role, after all, was for combat, with tasks such as scouting and garrison duty being relegated to other troops. If a man was fully geared, it was either for real combat, an intensive training exercise, or for parade. On all other occasions, the donning of full armor was an unnecessary drain on the endurance of both men and horses. Abusing either of these could prove fatal, as the downfall of most Cataphracts came when they inevitably ran out of steam on the battlefield.
You need insane stamina.
Thus, it was critical to ensure that man and horse were well maintained physically. The use of remounts proved effective at extending the useful life of a Cataphract in the field. The Parthians in particular were well known for this practice, with authors describing herds of thousands trailing mounted forces on campaign. The Romans too would have incorporated such remounts into their logistics train.
Okay.
Records reveal that remounting could even take place several times over the course of battle, with units cycling to the back to swap horses before sallying out again. Therefore, stripping the horse would be as specialized a process as any, taking care for the comfort of the animal while removing all the gear as efficiently as possible.
It's like the Formula 1 thing.
The next
Super fast.
Cataphract could make ready for battle.
Okay.
We hope you've enjoyed this live history video. A big thanks to the patrons for funding the channel, and massive shout out to the team at Imperium Romanum for their amazing reenactment and camera work. Please be sure to subscribe to their channel and let us know what collaborations you'd like to see next.
So yeah, I guess I'd never heard of them. The Cataphracts. Makes sense, they seem to be very specific and not have been in a lot of them in history. Makes sense why I didn't know the name. But yeah, I guess probably, you know, very effective or very like scary when in a battle, I can imagine. But at the same time, again, imagine being one of them, yeah, like the amount of stamina you drain from like each hit, and then if you fall off the horse, I mean, like with all that gear, like it must be like even swinging once must take like your whole body weight is coming with you. I don't know. It's so much gear. It's so much gear. They're basically like Roman knights. Knights inspired by them. Okay, okay. Very cool video. Very interesting.